Okay, Justin, so let's take a look at your score. And there's some great scoring in here, and there's some unnecessary scoring in here, or unnecessary elements. And there are a few things that I feel probably should be rescored if you are going to have this performed, all right? So, just a number of different things. So, let's start off at the very beginning. Now, you've got this beautiful solo violin happening right in here. Okay, and it's all nice. Okay, there's really nothing wrong with it. But did you notice that the accompaniment seems to somewhat stick out of the texture a bit, right? That it's really hard to hear the solo violin over the horns. Well, that is really true, right? So there are a number of things that are also problematic in the fact that you have the top note as viola, and then you have the bottom two notes of the chord that's taken over from the piano part played in horns. So the horns, the resonance of the horns is going to overwhelm the viola, right? So probably the viola needs to be marked up to around a piano dynamic, right, in order to balance with the horns. And even then, like just the sheer radiance of the horns has a tendency, even at piano, to just sort of take over, right? So maybe you do not need the hairpins, right? Like I'm just trying to figure out ways to sort of save this, right? So that the solo part can still be usable and the violas do not have to disappear. I mean, in really thinking about it, having a chord that is violas on top and horns on the bottom is probably not going to be the most balanced just in and of itself, even adjusting the dynamics, right? So it's just that the richness of the bass of the chord is just so strong that even when the horn player like really pulls it way back and the viola plays out a little bit, it still doesn't have like the right balance texturally then, right? So then you have other problems. So I would just say maybe rethink your horns right in here, okay? I mean, why couldn't it be all horns and like violas and cellos, right? For instance, see, that would give you a beautiful, even kind of a sound. And then I would say take away the hairpins here. Just because there are hairpins under the melody in the piano part doesn't mean that those hairpins apply to the accompaniment, right? I mean, what is there in the accompaniment that says or what is it about the dynamics that means that the accompaniment swells? In fact, it can't, because only a single note changes in pitch in the left hand of the piano, right? So in the original, there is nothing really about the first two bars that implies any kind of swell in the accompaniment. It's really just the melody, right? So that solves the first problem there, which is that the horns will just kind of speak out a little. So I would just say, just make all the horns and lower or middle strings play together with the horns down to pianissimo, the strings at piano, right? And then that can have continuity with the building texture here, right? Just you can just go right into it and then get bigger. I think that otherwise that's a pretty good idea. I like the idea of the solo violin. That's very intimate. It has a very has a very precious or personal kind of a sound. But I wouldn't go down to pianissimo. I'd just go down to piano, right? Just have everybody else go down to. In fact, I would say, if you were to follow my suggestion, just leave the horns with the dynamics that they've got now, but get rid of the hairpins here. And then have your strings and your solo violin go down to piano, and I think that you would have a nice balance right in there, right? Just because the piano has certain dynamics in it doesn't mean that it is necessarily something that will transfer over very well in an orchestral context. Now, going on to the development, we've got first oboe, bum ba da dum, bum ba da 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 dum. So yeah, so here you're sort of splitting the difference. You are supplying the first playing the upper note of harmony and the second playing the actual melody in the middle. So that's a good compromise. And, everything else works pretty well. I like the little billowing harp right in there. It's nicely done. And the only thing that I would say here about your timpani, that I think this is really unnecessary. Quarter note and, little tie, just kind of little bit of a tie, kind of denoting a sostenuto. You just write pianissimo, sostenuto, and then write down the time value that you want. Okay? So you can just supply a half note there. I would say don't really go over a half note. If the tempo's fast, you could do like a dotted half note, but there's really kind of no, this is just really kind of just really unnecessary. Okay? But everything else is scored fine, have absolutely no problem. Now, here's where we kind of get into some of the problems, and you probably have seen some of the evaluations where I take issue with marking mezzo staccato with a slur and then slurring into another note that isn't mezzo staccato, right? I just feel that is, it's not a really great way. And also, by slurring into this, where is the emphasis on the downbeat, right? Well, in fact, if you go mezzo staccato 3 times, the player is going to separately articulate this probably with their diaphragm or with their tongue, or they just ignore this the slur going across the bar, right? So if they're going to ignore it, you should too. Otherwise, like there were some orchestrators who did not have a separate slur underneath, sort of making the whole thing meaningless to have another slur there, right? So you're halfway there. Just move the end of the slur back to here, right, on each of these, and then here as well, and then you've got the right articulation style, right? But seriously, everybody who may be watching this, do not do mezzo staccato. Do not take mezzo staccato slurs and then go farther than that, right? If you have a group of articulations that are generally given meaning by having a slur over an articulation mark, say mezzo staccato or portato, right, where you've got tenutos in a row that are connected by a slur, don't extend the slur farther than the last one of those notes, okay? It's ineffective. It's not, even if you really, really intends that to have meaning, it doesn't really have meaning to the average player, right? And especially not, you have to think, well, I've got, what about a really, advanced understanding of articulation in a very modernist context? But that's not what we're doing here, right? This is basically, impressionist period tonal music, right? It's not like we're reinventing the wheel here. So please try to, think about just the standards of how you would notate something with slurs and and everything else. Okay, now having said that, bum 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 bum. That's nice. All clarinet family plus first bassoon. I really like it. And then you have the little answer, horns plus flute. What's the problem here? Okay, the problem here is that your flutes and glockenspiel should be marked piano to the horns pianissimo. Okay, the overtones from the horns will basically just kill your flutes. Okay, so they really have to be marked down, right? So they're already at pianissimo. You don't want it to be softer. And like I said before, you don't have to import or transcribe the same exact dynamics as the piano part, right? You can compensate. So flutes at piano might very well sound like piano, the pianoforte keyboard at pianissimo, right? So you don't have to just have it be the exact same thing. All right, so here we go. Bum, bum. So do you want that? Do you really want bow, bow, or bow, bow, bow? Right? Or maybe would it be better to go, down, up, down, up, down? Right? So, I mean, it doesn't, once again, it's a question of do we take something from the piano part and just, treat it as if it were something that needs to be in our, turned into breathing or bowing. So think about the fact that by slurring, by bowing over it, and by breathing over it, that we lose the sense of there isn't any emphasis on any other beat except for the downbeat here, right? So it's just da da. Whereas we could just take away all the slur and just go bum 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 bum, right? Or you could maybe go da da da. So just consider the options. I can actually see here that you probably intend this to be down, up, down. Okay, all good, but yeah, it's considering how strong this is. Just a passionate kind of a thing. Maybe slurring it isn't always the right option. So I'm not telling you what to do or what not to do here, but I'm just kind of trying to point out alternate ways that some of these things could go. All right, but in terms of how well is it orchestrated, it's fine. You hear this will probably not get swallowed into the texture of the strings. This is a phenomenon I've talked about before, which is when you have the flute playing an octave higher than the first violin, sometimes it gets enveloped in. But just because of the register, this is in the strongest register, and also it's kind of playing harmony, and it'll have a tendency to play out in that context. The flutes will probably be heard fine. Okay. And then this is all perfectly fine as well, the resolution and so on. Now, okay, here we're starting to get into glissando as a way of, pushing into a downbeat, okay? And here we've got our mark tree. That's really good, and that is one way to notate that. Another way is sometimes people have tremolo beams or even trill line. But yeah, I mean, putting a roll mark here, you've got. I'm looking at my screen really closely. I believe that is just a line. I don't want to change the. I don't want to blow that up because I don't want to mess with how I've got my screen set. So anyways, but an upward line, so the stick going across the bars. Okay, that's all good. All right, so just think about what you're doing here. You are kind of telling us what to pay attention to with your glissando, right? That is really the purpose of a glissando. It's just saying, hey, here's the downbeat, right? And I really like the fact that you have a diminuendo, right? And I almost feel that this should have been pianissimo, right? Even though I'm always the guy saying, hey, mark your harps up a little bit. I just feel that it just needs to be incredibly delicate there, right? Otherwise, I feel it's, at least how it turned out in the mock-up, it was really kind of like, hey, look over at, look at beat one coming up, right? As opposed to just naturally letting it unfold. All right? So, I mean, it really kind of comes down to a matter of taste, I mean, I'm sure people are kind of getting to be amused at how many times I say, that glissandos and upsweeps into the downbeat are kind of telling us, hey, look over there. Okay, so well and good. So it just is a matter of, what your tolerance is for that, or how much you feel that is, something that the music needs. But I just want to, to caution people that there might be overstressing, right? What is coming up. Now, certainly on this next page coming up, it really isn't it is a stronger place, but it isn't necessarily like a very emphatic place in the music in terms of just like coming to a resolution, right? It's more of a starting place of a new episode. And this is all nicely orchestrated right in here. Just really have no problems. I would say bring everybody down to piano, right? Except the horns, and the horns can be pianissimo. And then you get a better balance going forwards, right? Because just the way it is right now, the horns are going to be bright enough. And the way that you've scored all of this, even though you are being careful to keep this at mezzo forte to everybody else's forte, there's still going to be extremely, like an extremely gleaming quality to this, with the brass pushing from below underneath these winds and no support or moderation of the tone or the timbre by the strings, right? You just have the strings just kind of sitting on these D's and tremoloing, right? And so that doesn't really do anything to combine with the sound of the winds and to kind of temper them, right? So what's going to happen here is that especially with the horns, the horns are going to be pushing their body of tone onto the trumpets, right, where the trumpets are sitting, right? That's going to make the trumpets even brighter. And that is all going to sort of form this kind of hot ember inside this big push right in here. So even marking it down to mezzo forte, it's still going to make this really glow. Okay, probably your intention. Fine. But it won't have a sheen to it. Do you know what I mean? Well, I mean, everything has a sheen to it, but it won't have that kind of silky, it won't have that kind of arcing, smooth feel to it. It'll be more kind of bright and not angular, but it'll. And I don't want to say uncouth. That's the wrong word either. But it won't have that kind of more moderated kind of quality. But that's fine. I mean, if you don't want that, then you'll get a very kind of Russian sound there, like a sort of Mussorgsky or Borodin kind of a sound right in there. And this is kind of fun. The tremolos. You could have easily, like these tremolos right in here are just really, I mean, they're going to get buried. If they were an octave higher, right, or if they were doubling the flutes and just sort of combining into the chords, then I think that they would be more effective. But that's fine. I mean, you sort of want to end up here with everything really soft, and then okay, now here we are getting into pushing into that, blah, just like really kind of telling us what to listen to. All right, now here is so here is a slight problem. All right. Da 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 dun dun. Right, that's being played in oboe, and like here you have trumpets. So really, this is what are we going to hear here? It's really the trumpets. Is they're going to basically blot out the oboes. The oboes are going to give it a little bit of warmth, and even though you've got this balance at mezzo forte, like I said before, it's just really going to push at the resonance of the winds and just kind of eventually dominate them. I mean, like here you're saying, oh, A4, and they're basically playing a concert D, written A here. Okay, and then going up to a concert G, written D. But you have like all four of your horns playing that one note. So that is just a punch in the face, right? Those quadrupled horns in there are going to be just intensely powerful. And then we have this big upsweep right in here, okay? But the upsweep is going up to D. It is not going up to G, right? So it is distracting away from the kind of arc, the melodic arc, right? So it's sort of changing what the meaning of the line, right? The resolution's nice though. Yeah. Nice and discreet, and you give time for the sound to die away when it comes in. Okay, so yeah, I would just say, just be careful about, if you don't want it to be all about the brass, like if you want a more combined sound, then just be careful about how far up, how high you push the trumpets, right? Like, you could have kept the trumpets down and the winds the brass kind of more in, really not pushing up that far, and let the winds like soar up there, and then you'd have like probably a more combined brass and wind sound, as opposed to right here, which would be basically a brass sound with some winds around it, which also kind of comes out in the mock-up as well. Okay, now we get to this place. Right, so we have the restatement. Okay, and I don't really have a problem with any of this. This is really nice. I'm just kind of curious why, like, we have doubling on, English horn doubling the seconds, and you got nobody doubling the firsts, right? You have so much fluttering around going on in here. You could have had your oboes do all this fluttering, right? And you could have had one or two flutes doubling the first violin, right? Because, like, A2, like, here's just a little bit of philosophy for you, okay? Okay, when you have the that winds playing A2, A duet, they have a tendency to kind of become less subtle in their in the way they sound, right? They tend to harden, or they tend to phase, or become more muscular in the case of flutes and so on. Okay, now it is true that when you have this kind of fingered tremolo, the players are just basically going back and forth over each other's notes really, really quickly in this wonderful fluttering kind of a sound, and they don't necessarily have that harder sound. But I would say they are just as effective when they are covering a series of notes rather than playing the same two notes, right? So, like, you have two players playing the same single finger tremolo, and of course they are going to be playing over each other back and forth. But what's wrong with one of your oboists going B to C sharp and the other one going C sharp to E, right? That is just as effective as what you have scored here. And in fact, it's more effective than what you've scored, because you've scored your oboes higher than your flutes in a place where the flutes are much weaker, right? So I think it would just be better off if, like, both oboes were covering the same tremolo there, and then you freed up your flute to solidify the first violins, because, like, the way it is now, you'll get a nice rich combination with the second violin, but you just basically have more kind of a straight string sound above that, and the strings will be competing with the overtones from the horns and all this fluttering going on in the winds, right? So you need something to kind of firm that up. That's my Okay, I love the scrapes on the suspended cymbal. Don't overdo it. And I'm saying this as somebody who has actually written an entire movement that had a lot of scrapes and different cymbal effects, right? I didn't feel like it was overdone, but that's just something to think about. Like, ask yourself, well, am I overdoing it, right? So just kind of listen with a critical ear and see if you feel you might be using it too much. Okay, and then I could say like the same thing here. Like here you are using the flute to just sort of come in a bar late, or the piccolo to come in a bar late and start to double the first violin. Now notice this is actually in a fairly weak place for the piccolo. The piccolo is really not going to pick up a lot of strength until the next bar. And you've got all these winds and brass doing, taking harmonic roles. The clarinets and the oboes are basically doing the same exact thing, right? So could one single instrument have been spared to double the second violins? Could you have started some of that along with them in the bar before, right? So just as a way of strengthening both lines, right? Because the way it is now, you'll have kind of a weaker piccolo, just brightening the violin a little bit, and kind of nothing really strengthening the second violins who've got to play over the trumpets, right? They've got to cut through whatever sound is happening here in the trumpets, which is not very loud, albeit, but I will grant, but it still is something that is has a certain brightness to it. And they have to cut through the oboes, right? And the clarinets join together. So maybe you don't need both oboes and clarinets to play that. Maybe what you need is for even just a single clarinet or oboe to double the second violins and whatever other upper instrument, piccolo or whatever, right? So continuing on, we just really see things get very big here. Okay, and now you're asking something like you're asking the piccolo to do a run up to this high note, right? So how many runs up is this now, right? So this is the second one or third, if you count the glissando, right? And then there is like all this other glissando happening too. Okay, so you're asking the piccolo player to run up to this high F sharp and be sort of medium loud, right? Or medium soft, I should say. So it's not impossible, but it will really have a tendency to dominate the sound picture. Now, people might be looking at this and saying, wow, that is, are you sure you don't want ottava on that? Don't worry about it. Okay. That's fine. I would say that if there were a bunch of high notes and they just kept going higher and higher, I would say, okay, all right, I would break my ottava rule and say, go ahead and put some ottava there. But this is totally readable to a pro. Don't worry about that. I like what the glockenspiel is doing here. I like the way the harmony is scored out in here. I still feel you could have spared at least one clarinet or one oboe to double what's going on the second violins. Just to give it some consistency of strength. Okay, so now here you go extra slow, plus lent, and it's just too slow in the mock-up. Okay, so I think you should reconsider that tempo because then you go to another the suggestion of the final tempo is that it's slower than this, and yet you have it marked faster than this, right? So I think it got way too slow here, because it seems to sort of suck the energy out of the piece. It doesn't, I think that the tempo at the end should be the slowest tempo, right? And the tempo that you have at the end is perfect, I feel. So this part in here has to be a little slower than this and not as slow as that, right? Okay, so now we have the final statement. Just this lovely, this kind of cushion here of tremolo, bum 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 bum, which is clarinets and cellos and octaves, which is, it's a cool idea. Absolutely no problem for me on that. And then bum 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 bum. Okay, so we've got a vibraphone combined with flute, English horn, clarinet, bassoon. So it's a really rich sound, and I mean, I'll give you a pass on this. Like, if everybody really is listening to each other and playing softly, then the first flute will be all right, going all the way down to that D sharp here and this E here, without kind of getting blown out by the other winds, right? Because, like, if our wind quartet here is really controlling their dynamics, there's no reason why they couldn't all basically play pretty soft in all of those registers. Like, especially since you are having the English horn. The English horn has quite a bit more control going to its lower notes. Now, some English horn players would say, "Well, my instrument honks right there, so I don't know what he's talking about." But generally speaking, the English horn players that I've worked with feel that they have more control dynamically over their lower notes. So D sharp, E natural, that's all good. Like, going down to C though and B, written C and B, which would be sounding E and F below middle C. I think that's pushing it in terms of really being able to have fine dynamic control. But you just have to, Justin, you have to be aware that if you're going to write a passage like this with all of your winds working together, and you are having your first flute player go all the way down to this D sharp and this kind of combined kind of cascading chorale, that it really does put a burden on the other players to really be listening to that flute player and to match their dynamics. And can you trust the conductor to step in if he feels like they're not balancing? Right? So it's one of those things where you kind of have to decide, like, what is the consequence for this with the average orchestra? Will I have to be the one in rehearsal who says to the conductor, "Hey, can we have some more dynamic balance after C?" Right? So you just have to. So it's like sometimes things, you can score something that is possible. That is even likely with good players who are listening, but can you trust those players to listen, right? I mean, you would hope that you would, working with some pros. So part of the job of the orchestrator is to solve the problem before it happens, right? So this is one place where, like, I don't want to say, well, I wouldn't do this, but it would be a place where I would be really thinking about what I could do to prevent, careless playing from ruining the effect. And, so that basically just what I scored would just work without us having to take extra pains. Okay? And I don't feel that that's quite there yet, but still, I can't tell you that it won't work, right? Because that would be a lie. All right. So, and once again, I think you should just notate, like, what kind of actual duration that you want, and just mark it, and then just have that be what it is, rather than, Okay. Now, bum, 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 bum. Second violin plus oboe. That's okay. Now, I'm seeing this happen a lot, like strings and winds playing in octaves with the winds an octave above the strings. So I'm just seeing a ton of that in this particular a challenge. So, I mean, I know there's no particular reason for it, but I would just say watch out and don't do that all the time, right? It is really better to, like, what would be better under an oboe like this rather than second violin probably would be like a cello, right? So, thinking about the overtones, adding some brightness to the wind above, to the woodwind above. But I see, you already used the cello here, so you're wanting to give everybody a chance, right? The truth is that actually, like, clarinet and viola would be possibly a better, in terms of like the viola adding to the overtones of the clarinet would probably be something that would be more copacetic to the clarinet's timbre. And then the cello adding to the oboe's timbre, right? Okay, and then it's basically the same combination as before, only trading bassoon for bass clarinet. Bum, 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 bum. All right, and then we're just continuing on. Flute and clarinet. I would actually, if it were a case of like deciding whose role should be doing what, I would give the melodic statement to the firsts, and I would let the seconds do the cascading, right? Because the cascading is not really all that musically crucial, but stating that melody with eloquence is enormously important. Now here you have viola combining with trumpet, and like if we use the viola back here with the clarinet and then the cello with the oboe, then this actually opens things up for, I think, a much brighter, a more effective second violin or first violin doubling trumpet. I think that is just much more obvious. I think that the trumpet will basically just swallow the viola whole, even if there is a difference in marking there. I think the only chance that the violas have here is if the trumpet is marked piano. So if you want a better balance here or mixture, blend of these elements, then I would say it's give it to the second violins. All right, and then flute plus clarinet, that's all good. That's good registers for them to combine, fine. And then we got our little cascades. Adding horn right in here. Okay, so the minute that the horn was added was the point at which it would be like really hard to hear the flute getting down into its lower register, and it's great that you avoid that, right? So I don't know if one was determined by the other, but that would, if you were writing down to D sharp or whatever, really low notes for your flute on the top voice, even with pianissimo horns in the background, I would say it's just kind of skating on the thin edge of what's possible in terms of balance. Okay, and this is all fine. Okay, and a little bit of Glock. So you have all these trade-offs between vibraphone and Glock, and I mean, it's all doable. It's fine. Sometimes in a call like this, the vibraphone might be positioned under the Glock, so the player and the Glock might be sitting on a tray, and the tray has the or there might be a tray right next to the Glock, which has got all the mallets on it. So switching over could be very, very quick. Okay, so now here we've got C trumpets, we've got horns going all the way up to soft D sharp, right? It's still going to be very bright, even soft, right? It's going to be a kind of a penetrating tone. And here we've got the everybody, the upper winds and the upper strings are playing octaves and so on. So that's all fine. That's all effective. It's not really clear whether or not this is intended to be A2 or like a single player. I would say if you're going to combine two flutes with oboe, then just make it a single oboe. Okay. So yeah, so you're really keeping things nice and gradual in here. I think just speeding it up, you know, extra slow does not need to be really really slow. And I really like the kind of cascading glockenspiel. That's all doable at a slightly faster speed. So this is all fine. I mean, we're getting down into really weak. That's a really weak register for the piccolo, right? And whereas the oboe and the English horn are like going down towards stronger notes, which of course they're still capable of playing pianissimo, but still, yeah. Okay, all right, and then you end with this. Bum 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 bum. Okay, now once again, I would say this is not the only score where this gesture was split across two different horn players. Just leave it up to the first. The first can play this entire thing all the way through in one breath without passing out. You want one player to be in control of something that delicate, right? Because the danger is that this guy will get it absolutely perfect because he's the first, and then the third player will play it a little too exuberantly, right? So dun 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 dun, right? Or you might get dun 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 dun. Better to have your most expert player handle the final gesture and not split it up between people. Okay, and I would say that just in general is true of any solo, especially something that is really critical. Just leave it to the first. Just let them handle it. That is their job. They are practicing extra, and it's good for them to have like an overall vision of how something should go. Okay. All right. So, I mean, having gone through all of this, picked it to pieces and everything else, I really enjoyed this, Justin. And I mean, you are just really improving by leaps and bounds as an orchestrator. And this is some excellent work. So don't take my critiques to be fatal or to be and any indication of like a lack of judgment on your part. It's basically, I mean, it's the kind of things that I would be coaching a professional orchestrator, on those kinds of topics. So, in that respect, I think you did really, really well with this version, and I think that actually I'm sure that a lot of people are out there watching this and saying, well, wow, that was one of the best ones, right? So, this is definitely something that has a certain aesthetic to it and a certain personality to it, and I think you should really take pride in that. And especially just for me to be part of your training is just a big kick, and I really value that. And if there's anything that I've said in this evaluation that will make this score stronger, or perhaps bring it closer to a reading if you have plans for that, or will apply to scores that you have much more professional plans for that are similarly orchestrated. That's probably the main thing in these cases, isn't it? Then I would feel very fortunate. So thank you so much for such a strong entry and so many great ideas. And, and also, you've been supporting on Patreon for quite a while now. I mean, in some ways I feel like, Justin's a newcomer, but actually you've been supporting for a long time. And you have also been sort of a support in the community by posting interesting content and having a really positive attitude. Just like just the kind of attitude that I really want people to engage with, and have helpful comments of your own and perspectives, and the kind of things that really help other orchestrators in their own development. So thank you for that as well. And thanks everybody watching this. I really do appreciate if you have got the the interest to really go with me through all of these evaluations and see the different reasons why things may work one way or another. You probably notice in this score that there were a lot of places where I wasn't saying this is right and this is wrong. I was more saying, consider the options, right? So you know what you want to think about, possibly. Like, not necessarily what you want to change, but when you turn your own critical eye towards it, what are the places where you could really kind of maybe make a stronger decision, or maybe direct it to some place that you could possibly rewrite, or maybe even feel better about your original decision because you had a chance to think it over, right? So anyhow, with that, I will move on to the next evaluation, and thanks everybody for watching.